Today I'd like to talk to you all about the 1990 film Total Recall. I've always had a soft spot for 80s action films, from the pomp and circumstance on display, to the quotable one-liners, to the passion behind the choreography and special effects. There's a wide variety of experiences among the golden age of action films. While they tend to not be the most elaborate films, they're a pinnacle of popcorn enjoyment that run on adrenaline, visual intrigue, and sheer, unadulterated cool. Total Recall in particular is one of the last films cut from the cloth of 80s action films. Full to the brim with violence, one-liners, and larger-than-life scenes of futurism and space travel, even its more dramatic scenes move at a comfortably swift pace for easy viewing. Yet it utilises this familiar and brisk speed to hide small details that reward repeat viewings alongside its many breadcrumbs of foreshadowing. Plot is a far more central element to Total Recall than most of its peers. It crafts a relatively involved narrative that's worth analysing from a fair few angles, all without sacrificing bombastic scenes the genre is known for. Amidst the bloodshed, the explosions, the high-caliber bullets, and the interplanetary violence, there is an incredibly grounded tale being told here. Questions of purpose drive the film, asking the question what it takes to be fulfilled. An analysis of identity takes center stage as a sense of self becomes predicated upon memories you can no longer trust, and therein lies an imperative question. How well can one truly discern reality, especially when technology reaches a point where we can alter some foundational points of reference? Existentialism is explored quietly among the blood and viscera, but it leaves the viewer with many questions to sit with by the time the credits roll. Beyond this point, ladies and gentlemen, I will be speaking on the movie's narrative in varying degrees of detail. If you haven't seen Total Recall before, I would highly recommend doing so before continuing this video. While I do not believe knowing the story in advance will diminish one's enjoyment of the film, there is always a special feeling to experiencing a piece of work as blind as possible, having feelings that are distinctly your own. There's also feels like a good moment to have a side note. I feel it's important to periodically revisit media, both that you've already experienced and older works that are new to you specifically. Older works offer you a glimpse into both how things have changed over decades and how things have stayed the same. When revisiting familiar works, time between viewings will have changed you and offer you a new outlook. In the words of Heraclitus, no man ever steps in the same river twice, for it is not the same river, and he is not the same man. If you're still here, I imagine you're ready for spoilers. Let's begin with its opening moments, a scene both romantic and adventurous. It shows two figures walking along Mars' surface in spacesuits, and exchanging a soft and loving gaze before some of the cliffside crumbles beneath one of their feet. With his footing lost, he tumbles down, breaking the protective glass of the spacesuit along the cliff face, and then gasping for air as the vacuum of Mars takes its toll. Then, Douglas Quaid, played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, awakens abruptly from the dream to a playful, if aggressive, exchange with his wife, played by Sharon Stone. These first minutes establish your expectations and convey an important message. This film will shift in tone. Its violence will be sudden and brutal. It can be grounded and funny. It can be quiet and dramatic. Will all of these shifts be elegant? No, but some of these transitions lend to its strengths of uncertainty. Continuing on the foundations established at the start of the film, Quaid's interactions with his wife establish an important contrast. The relationship represents a common ideal. For many, to be married to someone attractive, sexually active, playful, and adventurous is a dream come true. Yet, even as he clearly enjoys this part of his life, there's an obsession with Mars. The need for purpose is presented overtly here, as he explicitly expresses that he feels like he's meant for something more than this. The rebuttal that follows quietly heightens the underlying themes of the film. Are the ideals of love truly enough to sate the endless yearning for meaning and purpose? With that established, let's tackle the central concept of the film. There are two main ways one can perceive the film's narrative. Option 1. The events of the film are taken at face value. Quaid's obsession with Mars is from having been there, experiencing much of the conflict between Cohagen's corporatist agenda and the mutant rebellion firsthand. Additionally, there is a layered conspiracy simultaneously aiming to keep him from returning to Mars and to drive him to return, so that he may interact deeply with both sides of the conflict once again. On the other hand lies a path presented in foreshadowing. Nothing that happens once Quaid is strapped into the memory-altering machine is real. Almost everything that happens in the film is laid out and building upon the details in the first 18.5 minutes. Tangible dream defined by the shots of rebellion he saw on the news, where everyone who tried to keep him away from Recall and/or Mars is painted as part of the conspiracy. Where the girl who lurks in all of his dreams is central to fighting back. An adventure where he gets to be the big hero, save the girl, and even save an entire planet while uncovering the truth of an ancient alien artifact along the way. Both interpretations are presented in a way that's reasonable. Watching it the first time, there's not much reason to doubt the events as they are presented. But once you watch the film a second time, there are so many details that feel all too deliberate. While the bulk of the acting is certainly cheesy, fitting more for the conspiracy-laden action path, I would like to highlight a surprising aspect of this film: Arnold Schwarzenegger's acting. People tend to associate him with roles that are either stoic and muted, a la Terminator, or full of his loud, quotable screaming. While this film is not devoid of iconic and screamed lines, the bulk of his performance is surprisingly grounded and vulnerable. He may be muscle-bound, but he makes a convincing everyman through most of the film, through his demeanour and periodic awkwardness. He doesn't command every scene with his physique and imposing nature. No matter how large he may be, he only feels superhuman in a select few fantastical scenes. On the note of Schwarzenegger's acting, let's take a moment to emphasize the other side of his performance. Despite Carl Hauser being Douglas Quaid's original identity, he is a character that spends the bulk of the film shrouded in uncertainty, made all the more ambiguous as Quaid faces the consequences of Hauser's actions despite Hauser no longer existing. Slow but steady flow of information around Hauser lends to the film's prominent mystique. For most of the runtime, you can't tell Hauser's allegiances, be they to the rebels, Cohagen, or purely to himself. It's an elegant undercurrent to the narrative that lends to intentionally shaky footing, a plot structure that leads you to question what's being presented to you and how much of it you can trust. Hauser's influence is present even in the subtleties of the presentation. Throughout the film, scenes with Quaid tend to feature him twice in some form or another. Be it through mirrors or monitors, the existence of someone intangible that looks just like him is felt repeatedly if you keep your eye open. It's but one element of this film's fantastic cinematography. Plot composition is a notable strong point of this film, an important part of the equation that makes even the more outlandish elements of the film feel believable. The other primary part of that equation is its focus on practical effects. Even though CGI was available for this film, it was used sparingly. Instead, animatronics take center stage here from the moment the curtain rises. The compression scene that takes place within mere minutes of the opening credits introduces you to the visual tone of the practical effects. Tangible, visceral, and uncomfortable. A tone that's reinforced when you are introduced to the Johnny Camp. It establishes the world's robotics as advanced, but still lacking the sophistication to feel alive. It's a thin line to walk to establish that sense of spacefaring futurism, while still carrying Paul Verhoeven's signature satirical critique of capitalistic systems. A highlight of the practical effects is the disguise employed to sneak past Mars's immigration office. In my reviewing, I was certain that the scene in which the 2 weeks woman's face segmented to reveal that she was secretly Quaid all along was accomplished with CGI in some form. Even recognizing how elegantly the practical effects were accomplished up to that point, it felt markedly well accomplished for the time. Yet lo and behold, the mask separating and rejoining itself to reveal Schwarzenegger's face, albeit mildly warped, was accomplished with immaculate use of practical effects. Let's not overlook this film's magnificent use of miniatures to sell the detail in Mars's surface. Miniatures historically require a heavy amount of work, but add a timelessness to the end result. Even 35 years later, Mars feels like a place you could walk on because of the beautifully intricate work put into the miniatures. Alongside Mars' surface, prosthetics make the mutations of some of its denizens feel textured and real. There's a raw quality to it all, adding to the satirical, corporatized discomfort of the world. Moving away from pure praise, there are a couple of elements that warrant mixed reactions. Firstly, the main scenes with CG utilize an X-ray scanner that's built upon motion capture. The technology itself can feel rather stiff and dated, even if the scene is ultimately paid off well with Quaid jumping towards the screen for a well-shot moment of shattered black glass surrounding him. Similarly, some of the composition effects, such as the digitized screens in Universe, can feel immediately outdated and reveal their seams to more modern viewers. But even with those seams, I feel like it adds a particular retrofuturistic charm. On the note of seams, the chroma keying used is far from convincing on higher resolution monitors. The lingering remnants of its technology break through enough to hamper one's suspension of disbelief. It's a far cry from anything able to take away meaningfully from the film, in my opinion, particularly as those scenes are often full of the aforementioned stunning miniatures. For another element that threatens one's suspension of disbelief, there is a looseness to the set design. When fights do break out in the film, the walls and consoles are prone to shuffling and shaking from the impact, despite how firm the concrete or metal should be. Fortunately, or perhaps as a byproduct of this, fight scenes other than shootouts prove to be quite scant. Even with many traditional action scenes being uncommon, this is still an action film at heart. Historically, action films have chosen from 3 main paths to define their fight scenes: choreography, special effects, or blood. A film that makes good use of choreography is typically inspired by Hong Kong action films and lends a natural fluidity to the fight that guides the eye naturally. Special effects-oriented films tend to focus on spectacle, creating grand scenes of superhuman intrigue. Contrarily, the more bloodied path focuses on evoking visceral reactions with either grounded or thoroughly excessive wounds. Let's look at Total Recall from each of these prospective paths. In terms of fight choreography, Total Recall is very light. Its action scenes lean more into cover-oriented shootouts. There are only 3 scenes to employ fight choreography. All 3 are fairly succinct, with only one leveraging the action itself as the focal point. Curiously, it's the first fight scene. Upon being ambushed and outnumbered, Quaid's body moves with reactions far greater than an everyman should. As a result, the focus on the action here is more in service of the plot than for typical fluidity in cinematography. The other 2 scenes, both involving his wife, Laurie, have minimal focus on the way the action moves, instead focusing on abrupt tonal shifts rooted in uncertainty. Whether uncertainty of the situation he's found himself thrust into, or uncertainty of his reality, Quaid ends up attacked very suddenly with the chaos of the plot driving the tension far more than the fight choreography. While the film has a strong use of practical effects throughout its presentation, special effects rarely have a prominent impact on the structure of the action. Barring the X-ray scene, the bulk of practical effects in its action scenes sell the potency of bullet holes. Large holes that sell futuristic, high-caliber weaponry, and death shots punctuated by a hole through the head. Ultimately, as far as action goes, Total Recall has focused far more on the path of blood. Bodies get mangled and mutated. Blood splatters and coats the ground after the action is done. It may not compare to the sheer quantities of blood spilled in some other ultra-violent films, let alone horror, but it sells the impact of the world and its violence well enough. That level of visceral action helps lend weight to how many fight scenes in this film are shootouts. The art of a shootout in film is easily lost. Guns can easily feel limp and lifeless, any back and forth hampered by dialogue-heavy cover battles that trade inaccurate shots, any impact being sold merely by a light coat of red until a fatal shot is achieved. The way clothes fray from any given shot in this film makes the bullets feel like they have true impact. Even if it is exaggerated, it makes gun-oriented action scenes far more engrossing than many of its peers and contemporaries. The greatest focus of the action, however, is tension. You know from the word go that our hero will survive and win out in the end, but you still feel on the edge of your seat throughout the violent spectacle in part because of uncertainty. Quaid will be fine, of course, but who can he really trust? His wife? The rebels? Can he even trust himself? How much of what's happening is real? If this is real, how far will Cohagen go? If this isn't, what are the consequences this will have on Quaid? Will he be able to wake up? If he does, how would it affect the relationships he has in the real world? Therein lies the central element that ties this in with all of the greatest sci-fi stories. It presents a technology that can sound wonderful on paper, but how much of its nuance are we ready to accept? And do we really think this is something we'd like to truly embrace in our lives? Memory and identity sit at the center of this story. The two are often portrayed hand in hand. After all, memory is the collection of our experiences, a testament to the life we have lived thus far, what we've done, what we've felt, what has happened to and around us is a central pillar of our identity. Without that foundation, what defines who we are? Exploring this, Douglas Quaid is initially defined predominantly by what others tell him he is. He is the man Laurie loves. He is a construction worker. He is a fish out of water in a new city. Even his desires outside of that feel influenced externally. His desire to visit Recall is driven by an advertisement he sees on the bus to work. His obsession with Mars is portrayed through his fixation on the news. At the start of the film, Quaid has no actions to define himself. Is this a product of having lived a mundane life, devoid of a source of deep satisfaction? Or is this the result of his memories being kept bare to fulfill his designated purpose by Cohagen? Either way, it reflects a core pillar of identity, and a central derision of a society that can have their memories and, in turn, their feelings and very identities so readily warped. Yet there's a valid question to be raised around Hauser. Is the line between Quaid and Hauser a matter of memory? Despite having Hauser's body, Quaid establishes a central difference between himself and Hauser: the choices he makes. Everything we learn about Hauser portrays him as duplicitous, ultimately acting only to serve his own interests and, in turn, Cohagen's. Quaid rejects everything Hauser is as he learns his true nature. He actively makes the choice and takes the actions to resist the corporatized dystopia choking Mars, deciding by his own volition to prioritize the people living on Mars, despite time and time again being distrusted by those very same people. And for valid reason, given they knew him before Hauser. This could, of course, simply all be part of the fantasy instilled at Recall, but even that is portrayed as Quaid having some control over what happens. It reflects a central part of his identity either way. He wants to be able to help people, yearning deeply for the opportunity to do so and seeing no path for it in his day-to-day existence. That yearning is another core facet to this tale. Regardless of path, there is a restlessness in normalcy, a feeling that resonates with many across decades. People want there to be more to life, be it meaning, or purpose, or just an opportunity to become extraordinary. There is a deep-seated desire for there to be something special. This is the only narrative theme that I believe the film shares with its inspiration, We Can Remember It For You Wholesale by Philip K. Dick. It shares the core concept, but other central themes of identity and reality were not explored beyond the surface in the original story. It's an element that is truly timeless, as familiarity and monotony can only soothe the soul so much. In Dick's original, the yearning is inevitable, reflecting a common reality of the era. Whale's marriage is dry and loveless, with his only escape from monotony being his desire to visit Mars, which she seemingly derides every time he brings it up in favour of exploring Earth's waters. But even in Total Recall's more idealistic scenario that portrays affection, playfulness, and room for some adventure, such as a proposed trip to Saturn, that yearning persists. It reflects a fundamental need in all of us, a blazing fire that takes many forms in different times. Try as we might to stamp them out, those passions demand to be explored and experienced, no matter how unrealistic. There is, however, an important diverging point rooted in the cultural differences across the 24-year gap between the short story and the film. Chiefly, Total Recall uses the premise presented to critique how our reality, our ideals, and our sense of self is warped by media. Portrayed in the film most strongly with news and advertisements, the screens we see drive the plot considerably more than you would expect. If you abide by the perception that the entire film was a dream, it's reinforced further by how much of what happens in the dream is affected by what Quaid saw televised. This is a topic that is all the more poignant as the years have gone by. A trend that many science fiction greats unfortunately share. With media becoming such a centralized part of our world and culture, we are all too vulnerable to letting ourselves be warped and redefined by what we're shown, especially in contrast to the mundanities and emotional weight that life throws at us at the best of times. Media is not a replacement for living life. Art can inspire us, expose us to new ideas and cultures, and offer us new paths by which to grow and discover ourselves, but it cannot replace living. Reading about a place, no matter how thoroughly, will never offer the same experience as physically going if the opportunity arises. In the original short story, Recall is briefly presented as the second best option, that costs nearly the same as a real trip, only to be subverted by McLean in classic salesman fashion, affirming that the Recall experience is better as it's devoid of the quote, vagueness, omissions, and ellipses of having actually gone. In the end, in either version, it is a designed experience. Your own autonomy in that memory, and by extension your own experience in it, only partially yours. You will have rescinded control of a part of what defines your reality, a corporate, profit-driven entity that does not have your best interests at heart. Ultimately, as with any Philip K. Dick-inspired work, the nature of reality is a central question and theme. How can we know if what happened in this film was real, or merely a dream once Quaid falls asleep 18.5 minutes in? What tools do we have in our own lives to ensure that we can discern the reality around us? It is a fundamental aspect of existentialism, one that becomes all the more relevant with every moment that science fiction becomes closer to science fact. It is a philosophical aspect that warrants a personal exploration of answers. There is a degree to which reality is relative. that what you experience is primarily defined by adjacent factors, but I think most importantly, reality is defined by your choices and the path you decide to carve. Does one need a divine purpose to be adventurous and live life? Not every life must be grand and imposing. Even simply knowing your community better and treating people with kindness and understanding is an important step of a journey, both internal and external. After all, whether fantasy or reality, Douglas Quaid changed the reality around him through earning the trust of those he met and choosing to strive for a better present and future for them. But I can only speak from the reality I've come to know. Whether you've already seen Total Recall or not, I ask you to watch it sometime, discover new answers in your currently known sense of reality, and decide where you'd like to take that journey next. Perhaps, if you're lucky and determined, you might even get your ass to Mars.